Leafa's eyes were wide with shock as she watched the boy use the salamander's own momentum against him. The boy flipped backward, lance and all, sending the salamander crashing into his partner.
Kala.
The salamander cried out in surprise as they both fell to the ground with a loud clatter. The boy quickly turned around to face them, reaching back for the sword behind his head. But then he hesitated and looked at Leafa uncertainly.
Can I defeat these guys?
He asked. Leafa was still trying to process what she had just seen, but she managed to answer.
I think that's a good idea.
They're definitely trying to hurt you. The boy nodded, seeming to agree with her reasoning. He slowly pulled out his sword, and it looked kind of flimsy. He dragged the tip along the ground as he moved forward. Even though he had been talking tough, he didn't seem very confident. His stance was all wrong. He was leaning way too far forward with his left foot out in front. And then, in an instant, a huge shock wave exploded, where the boy had just been standing. Even Leafa was always on her toes, never caught off guard in the game, but this time she was surprised. She quickly spun around to see what was happening. The boy was now crouched down far from where he had been standing just a moment before. He was holding his sword up like he was about to swing it right in front of him. Just then, the salamander that had crashed into them suddenly burst into flames, red end flames that covered its body. In an instant, the salamander disappeared, disintegrating into nothing. A tiny flame hovered in midair, the only sign of what had just happened. Leafa's eyes were wide with fear as she wondered, how is that even possible? She was shaking all over, still trying to process what she had just seen. In this virtual world, there's one thing that determines how fast you can move, how quickly your brain can handle the signals it gets from the special suit you wear. Imagine a special connection between your brain and the hemisphere. It sends a signal to your brain which quickly figures out what to do, and then sends back a message that tells your character how to move. The faster this process happens, the quicker your character can react. Most people need a lot of practice to get really fast, even faster than they could in real life. Leafa is super proud of her skills, and for good reason. She's one of the speediest sylphs around. She was super fast and could react in a split second. After a year of playing ALO, she thought no one could catch her off guard in a fight. But this changed everything. Leafa and the leader of the flying salamanders were shocked as they watched the boy quickly get back on his feet, sword ready to go. The other salamander was still confused about what had just happened. The boy spun around, searching for his opponent in the wrong direction, but he didn't wait to be spotted. Instead, he got ready to strike again with a powerful attack that Leafa was determined not to miss this time. At first his movement was slow and casual, but as soon as his foot hit the ground, everything changed. He became a blur as a shockwave ripped through the air, creating a huge burst of speed. She finally saw it happen. It was like watching a crazy movie scene play out in super speed. The boy's sword zoomed up from low to high, cutting the salamander right in half. But even the special effect flash was a tiny bit slow. The boy kept moving forward for a few extra steps before striking a pose with his sword held high above his head. A blast of flames lit up the scene and another salamander bit the dust. Leafa's eyes were fixed on the action and she was amazed by the speed of the fighter. But it wasn't just his speed that was impressive. He was also doing some serious damage. Those two salamanders hadn't been at full strength to start with, but they still had a lot of health left. Yet one hit was all it took to finish them off. That's just not normal. In the world of ALO, figuring out how much damage someone can do is pretty simple math. This was a pretty basic calculation. It only looked at how strong the weapon was, where it hit, how fast it attacked, and how tough the target's armor was. In this case, the damage wouldn't be very impressive. And the salamanders had really strong armor. That meant the boy must have been super accurate and fast to take them down. He quickly got back on his feet and focused on the leader of the salamanders, which was still floating in the air. The boy casually rested his sword on his shoulder and asked, "What's going on? Want to take a turn?" The salamander was shocked, but he quickly got himself together. He smiled weakly and said, "No thanks. I know I wouldn't win. If you want my stuff, I'll just leave it for you." The salamander explained that his magic skills were really strong, almost at 900. He didn't want to lose all his progress by dying in the game. The boy smiled and said, "At least you're being honest." He turned to Leafa and said, "What about you? Want to take on that guy? I'll stay out of it." Leafa couldn't help but laugh. This was a big change from how he usually acted. She had been really wanting to beat one of the salamanders with her friends, but now it didn't seem as important. No thanks, she said with a smile. Next time I'll come out on top, salamander. The red warrior just laughed and said, honestly, I don't think I could beat you in a one-on-one fight anyway. He spread his wings and took off into the air with a burst of fairy dust. The branches above rustled for a second, and then he vanished into the dark night sky. Now, only Leifer, the boy in black and two glowing red remain lights were left behind. The flames were out in just a minute. The girl turned to the boy, feeling a bit nervous again. So, what do I do now? She asked. Should I thank you? Run away, or pull out my sword? The boy quickly swung his sword back and forth, then put it back in its holder on his back. He gave her a sly grin. Since I'm the hero who just saved you from those flames, he said, I think I deserve a big hug from the princess I rescued. Are you crazy? Leifa yelled, her face turning bright red with anger. I'd rather fight you. The other person just laughed and said, haha, I'm just kidding. Leifa was furious and disgusted by how much he seemed to enjoy teasing her. She gritted her teeth, trying to come up with a sharp comeback. But before she could say anything, a new voice jumped into the conversation. That's right, she can't do that. It was a young girl who spoke up out of nowhere. Leifa scanned the clearing, but it was empty. Then a boy spoke up, hey, I told you not to come out. As she looked closer, she noticed something shiny trying to break free from his pocket. It popped out and started spinning around his face, making tiny jingling sounds. A little voice said, the only ones who get to hug Papa are Mama and me. The boy stuttered, Pee Papa. Leifa took a few steps closer, and saw that it was a tiny fairy, no bigger than a thumb. It was a navigation pixie, the kind you could summon from a help window. The fairies were only supposed to answer basic questions about the game. But then Leifa saw a tiny fairy circling around a boy's head. She stared at it in surprise, forgetting to be suspicious of him for a moment. No, it's not what you," the boy started to say, but he quickly covered the fairy with his hands and smiled nervously. Leifa peeked around his hands to get a better look. Hey, is that one of those special private pixies? She asked. The boy looked confused. You know, the kind that were given away to people who pre-ordered the game. Leifa explained, I've never seen one before. It's so cool. Just then, the tiny fairy piped up. No, I'm not, but the boy quickly covered her mouth again. Yeah, that's it, he stuttered. Trying to play it cool. I just got lucky in the draw, he said with a grin. Leifa raised an eyebrow and gave him a once-over, scanning him from head to toe. What's going on? She wondered aloud. The boy looked at her curiously. You're really weird, Leifa said bluntly. I mean, you've been signed up for this game forever, but your gear looks like something a beginner would wear. And yet you just kick butt back there. The boy shifted uncomfortably. Well, I made my account a long time ago, but I only started playing recently, he explained. I was busy playing a different virtual reality game, he said. Oh, Leifa replied, still sounding unsure. This answer didn't completely clear up her doubts, but if he had practiced with the special headset on another game, that might explain his super-fast reflexes. Leifa asked another question. What's a Spriggan like you doing all the way out here? Your home is supposed to be really far east. The Spriggan stumbled over his words. Because I got lost. Leifa couldn't help but laugh at his silly excuse. Lost? She burst out, finding it hard to believe. Come on, no way you're that lost. You're really something else. Leifa couldn't help it. A big laugh burst out at the funny look on his face. After she finished laughing at him, she put her long sword back in its holder. Okay, fine, she said with a grin. You deserve some credit. Thanks for saving me. Hi, I'm Leifa, she said with a smile. Kirito grinned back and introduced himself. I'm Kirito and this is Yui. As he spoke, he held out his hands to reveal a tiny pixie perched on them. The little creature bowed low, then fluttered up to land on Kirito's shoulder. Leifa was surprised by how much she wanted to hang out with Kirito. She wasn't usually shy, but making friends in this game wasn't easy for her. For some reason she felt like talking to Kirito would be different. She decided to take a chance and ask him. So, what are you up to after this? The boy Kirito shrugged and said, not much. Leifa saw her opportunity and suggested, well, in that case, how about I buy you dinner? Kirito's face lit up with an amazing grin. It was so natural and real that Leifa was impressed. In virtual reality games like this one, It was hard to make emotions look genuine, but Kirito's smile seemed totally authentic. That sounds awesome, he said with a smile. I'm searching for a teacher, someone to show me the ropes. What do you want to learn about? I thought for a moment before answering. This world and especially that tree. I nodded toward the northeast, my eyes fixed on a towering giant in the distance. My companion's smile faded as he followed my gaze. You mean the world tree? He asked, his voice filled with surprise. I know a thing or two about it, he said with a grin. As a matter of fact, I've been around here for a while myself. He thought for a moment before speaking up. If you want to learn more, I'd suggest heading to the neutral town north of here. It's a bit of a journey, but trust me, it's worth it. I raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was the right move. Are you sure that's a good idea? Leafa rolled her eyes. You really don't know anything, do you? She said to the guy next to her. They were talking about a town called Swilvane that was supposedly closer to their destination. But Leafa wasn't having it. That's Sylph territory, she explained. The guy looked confused. Is that bad? He asked, sounding pretty clueless. Leafa was shocked. Well, in a Sylph town we can't attack them, but they can definitely attack us, she said. The guy thought about this for a moment. So they're just gonna jump out and attack me or something? He asked, looking a bit worried. You'll be hanging out with me, Leafa. I've heard the Sylph land is amazing, and I really want to see it for myself. Just call me Leafa, she said with a smile. You're definitely one of a kind. If you want to come along, I won't stop you. But don't say I didn't warn you. It might not be a trip back home. She couldn't help but feel happy that he liked her homeland so much. Leafa loved the Sylph territory too, and it was cool to hear someone else think it's awesome. She loved the idea of surprising all her friends by taking a rare Spriggan on a walk around town. Alright, I'll fly you to Swilvan, she said with a grin. It's about time everyone started playing anyway. She glanced out the window and saw that it was just past 4 p.m. She still had some time to have fun. Leafa's wings were almost fully charged again, and she fluttered them once or twice, making them glow. Kirito's eyes widened with curiosity. Wait, you can really fly without a controller? He asked. The other person smiled and replied, yeah, I can. How about you? Kirito chuckled and made a grabbing motion with his left hand. I just learned how to use this thing, he admitted. The person nodded thoughtfully. Using voluntary flight takes some skill. Some people get it right away, while others never quite figure it out. Let's give it a shot. Turn around and keep your hands off the controller for now. Kirito spun halfway around and she reached out with her index fingers to gently touch his back, just above his shoulder blades. The little pixie perched on his shoulder watched with curiosity. Can you feel what I'm touching? She asked. Kirito nodded. Yes, it's called voluntary flight, she explained, but it's not as simple as just imagining yourself flying. Imagine you have invisible bones and muscles growing out of your back. You need to move them like they're real. The boy repeated the words virtual bones and muscles in a confused tone, and his shoulder blades twitched. Suddenly the gray wings that seemed to be made of nothing started to shake and tremble through his black clothes. His teacher said, that's it. First you need to move all the muscles in your shoulders and back until you figure out which ones control your wings. As soon as she spoke, the boy's back scrunched inward, like he was trying to squeeze something out. The sound of Kirito's wings got higher and higher until it was a super high-pitched hum. Yes, that's it. Try again, but this time give it all you've got. Leafa cheered him on. Kirito pulled his arms in tight, grunting as he tried really hard. When Leafa thought he was ready, she gave him a big slap on the back. What the f? Kirito suddenly shot up into the air like a rocket. Afarbaliz, his yell got fainter and fainter as he got smaller and smaller. There was a quick rustling of leaves above and then he was gone, beyond the top of the trees. Leafas and the little pixie who had fallen off Kirito's shoulder looked at each other in surprise. Afarbaliz seemed to say at the same time, Papa, they cried out, taking to the air to chase after him. As they left the forest, Leafa and Yui gazed up at the night sky. That's when they spotted a wobbly figure stumbling from side to side in front of the big golden moon. A sad cry echoed through the air. Afraza. Let me know. Leafa and Yui looked at each other, and burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. They giggled together. I'm sorry, Papa. This is just too funny. They floated next to each other holding their sides as they laughed. When they finally stopped, they heard Kirito's sad voice again. and they started chuckling all over. Lifa's legs kicked wildly as she laughed, wondering when she'd last had so much fun. Lifa finally stopped laughing and grabbed Kirito's collar to stop him from flying all over the place. She taught him again how to fly on his own, and after just 10 minutes he was already trying to fly by himself. He was a bit shaky, but he was getting the hang of it. "Whoa, this is amazing!" Kirito exclaimed as he made big turns and looped around in circles. Lifa laughed and said, "I know, right? It's such an awesome feeling." "Wow, I never want to stop flying like this," Lifa exclaimed. Her friend agreed, and in her excitement, Lifa flapped her wings to fly right next to Kirito. A tiny pixie chimed in, "Hey, no fair. Let me join in too." The little creature zipped into place between them, to help them improve. Someone offered some tips. "Remember, the key is to keep your back and shoulder movements small. Practice those, and you'll be a pro in no time. If you're really big and clumsy, it's hard to swing a sword while flying. That's not what you want during an air battle. Now, are you ready to head to Sylvain? Follow me." She made a sharp turn, checked where she was going, and then took off towards the other side of the forest. She flew slowly at first, since this was Kirito's first time flying, but soon he caught up to her. "You can go faster if you want," he said. "Oh yeah," she replied with a grin. Then she folded her wings, and sped up. She picked up speed, hoping Kirito would finally give in. The air rushed past her, whipping her entire body and making a loud whooshing sound in her ears. But to her surprise, even when she hit 70% of her top speed, Kirito was still right behind her. Usually players would slow down way before reaching their maximum flight speed, because the mental pressure gets too intense. Lifa was super impressed that her partner could master voluntary flight so quickly. It showed he had a lot of determination. She clenched her teeth and took off at top speed. This was the fastest she'd ever flown with someone, and it was exhilarating. Nobody else could keep up with her. The forest below became a green and brown blur as they zoomed past. The sound of their flight was like music, with Lifa's sylph wings making a high-pitched whine that harmonized with the Spriggan's whistling wings. Suddenly the pixie zipped back into Kirito's pocket, crying out, "Athea, I've had enough." Kirito and Lifa exchanged a glance, then burst out laughing. As they walked, the forest started to clear up, and they saw a bunch of colorful lights twinkling in front of them. In the middle of it all stood an amazing tower that shone brighter than everything else. They had finally arrived at Sylvain, the capital city of the Sylph region, and its famous Tower of Wind. As they got closer, they saw the main streets and lots of players running around, doing their thing. "Hey look! There it is!" Kirito yelled over the wind. "We're going to land right at the base of that tower in the center."
Wait.
Lifa's smile suddenly froze as a thought popped into her head. "Kirito, do you know how to land?" He just stared back, frozen. "I don't," he muttered. The huge tower was already right in front of them, taking up half their view. Lifa smiled and said, "Sorry, it's too late now. Good luck." She looked worried, but she started getting ready to slow down. She spread her wings to catch the air, and began to descend into the square below, stretching her legs out in front of her. "What?" The Spriggan dove straight at the tower wall, still shrieking at the top of his lungs. Lifa watched in shock as he disappeared from view. She said a quick silent prayer for him. A few seconds later, a huge crash shook the air. "That was crazy," someone exclaimed. "I'm never flying again." Kirito glared at Lifa, who was sitting in a colorful flower bed at the base of the green tower. Just then a tiny pixie on his shoulder piped up, "I got super dizzy." She swayed her head around in circles, looking like she might fall off Kirito's shoulder at any moment. Lifa was trying not to burst out laughing. She leaned over, her hands on her hips, and said, "That's what happens when you get too carried away. You're lucky to be alive. I thought for sure you were a goner." The guy shot back.
Gee, thanks for believing in me.
He had just crashed into the wall at full speed, but somehow he still had plenty of health left. Despite the nasty collision, Kirito had more than half of his energy remaining. This guy was a total mystery. Was he just getting lucky, or did he know some secret way to roll with the punches? A girl reassured him, "Don't worry. I've got you covered." She started chanting some kind of healing spell and held out her right hand. Suddenly tiny blue sparks shot out of her palm and rained down on Kirito. "Whoa, cool. Whoa, magic is real." Kirito asked. His eyes locked on hers. Only the most powerful beings can use high-level healing spells, she explained. But everyone should learn basic magic, it's super useful. Kirito's curiosity was piqued. So different races are good at different kinds of magic? He asked. What about Spriggans? His friend thought for a moment. Spriggans are great at finding treasure and creating illusions. But those skills aren't very helpful in a fight, which makes them the least popular race. Kirito stood up, shaking his head. This is why you should do your research before making a decision. He stretched his arms wide and looked around. Wow, this is amazing, he exclaimed. The Sylph town is really beautiful. Lifa smiled as she showed him around her hometown. Swilvan was also called the Jade City because everything in it was some shade of green. The city had delicate towers that were connected by paths that seemed to float in midair. Every building, every path, and even every decoration sparkled with a lovely jade green color. The city came alive as the evening lights flickered on, chasing away the darkness. The sight was like something out of a dream. Lifa's eyes widened in amazement at the Lord's mansion, behind the Tower of Wind. It was the most incredible building she had ever seen in all of Alfheim. She and her friends stood there, quietly watching. As people strolled through the city of twinkling lights, suddenly a voice shouted out from their right. Lifa, you're okay. Lifa turned to see a young sylph with bright yellow-green hair, sprinting towards her, waving her arms wildly. Oh, Rikun! Rikun stopped in front of Lifa, his eyes wide with excitement. That's amazing, he exclaimed. If anyone could escape from a huge group of enemies, it would be, but then he saw something that made him freeze. There was a dark figure standing next to Lifa. Rikun's mouth dropped open in shock. What? You're a Spriggan, he stuttered. Taking a step back, he put his hand on the dagger at his side, ready for anything. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice shaking slightly. But before things could get out of hand, Lifa jumped in to calm him down. It's okay, Rikun, she said. He saved me. A girl exclaimed. She turned to her friend Rikon, who still looked totally confused. This is Rikon. My buddy, she explained. He got beat up by those crazy salamanders just before I met you. A guy with a friendly smile stepped forward. Sorry I didn't get here sooner, he said. My name's Kirito. The girl's friend shook Kirito's hand and bowed really low. Nice to meet you, he muttered. But then Rikon suddenly jumped back again, looking freaked out. Wait, no, he cried. Are you sure about this? Lifa. Maybe he's a spy, someone suggested. At first others had their doubts too. But then they thought, nah, he seems too goofy to be sneaky. Someone else spoke up. Hey, that's not fair. Reckon was watching Lifa and Kirito laugh together, looking suspicious. He cleared his throat to get their attention. Sigurd and the others are already waiting in Daffodil Hall. He said, they're going to divide up the loot there. Oh okay, someone replied.